Our next speaker is a man with a very long list of credentials, and I was so amazed when I got to hear him on WBI, I think was the first time, and then seeing him on many, many TV shows, PBS News, and various other mainstream news in the last year especially, where he was doing the good work of fighting the good fight. Ray McGovern works with an organization called Tell the World, which is a project of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C. After 2 years as an U.S. Army officer in the 60s, Ray was a CIA analyst for the next 27 years. In the CIA, he prepared and briefed the President's daily brief for Presidents Nixon, Thorne, and Reagan. On May 4th, 2006, Ray received unusual media attention after an impromptu debate with then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld on live TV. Did you all see it? I did. See, when you do something like that, they can't help but cover you. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, Vice President Cheney's strong resistance to an independent investigation of 9/11 suggested to Ray that the administration has something to hide, a suspicion stoked by the whitewash report produced by the 9/11 Commission. A native New Yorker, Ray believes that only an independent commission can credibly distinguish between misfeasance and malfeasance regarding 9/11. Ray's attempts to speak truth to power, as well as to the rest of us, are supported not only by his church, but also by his 66 colleagues in the organization he founded called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Please welcome Ray McGovern.
Thank you very much. It's good to be home. You know, as I go to other places besides my home of New York City and speak, I often encounter very real signs of discouragement. And when people come up and say, you know, I'm discouraged, I'm reminded of when I was a freshman at Fordham, and I happened to be feeling that way, and midway through freshman year with the professors piling on the work, and I went to Father Tim Healy, and I said, you know, I'm discouraged. He turned on me and he said, what'd you say? I said, I said, I'm disgusted. He said, well, good. I thought you said discouraged. Discouraged is not allowed. Disgusted? That's good. So how many of you are disgusted? I think it's fair to say we're New Yorkers, we're fed up, and we're not going to take it anymore. I'm going to talk a little bit about my grandmother and my granddaughter. 5 generations of folks that started in Ireland when my grandmother came over at the age of 18 in 1888 to this great city, followed by her upcoming husband on the next ship, mind you. And so I'm a New Yorker going back to 1888. That's not the Mayflower, but it's enough for me. I mention this because I'll be saying a little bit about them, and it's particularly my granddaughter Claire. I had the privilege of spending the holiday with my 6 grandchildren and 5 children, so it was a really momentous event. And I looked at Claire, she's now 7, but when she was 4, she was watching television with my daughter Kathleen. I happened to be on, and my wife had time to tell Kathleen. So they're watching me together, and after it was over, she went to Kathleen and she said, Mommy, that was Grandpa. And Kathleen said, yeah, it was. She said, well, Mommy, that means the other people are real, too. Now, that's cute on his face, folks, but think a little deeper. Think a little deeper. If you don't know someone in the picture, the other people aren't real, too. And here in this gathering tonight, we talk about people who have relatives, loved ones, friends who perished on 9/11, have just ask you to raise your hand if you had that kind of a person. We know because we had someone in the picture. My wife's cousin is why I raised my hand. Do we need an independent investigation? All right, we do. Why? Well, because the first one was a crock, wasn't it? That's what we call it in the Bronx, a crock. Why was it a crock? Well, let me tell you what it was worth. Okay, I'll draw on my Irish heritage here for a story from Northern Ireland with these two nuns. They're coming home of a winter evening, and they're driving their car to the convent from the hospital where they work, and don't they run out of petrol? It's getting dark, but they got to the petrol station just in time, and all they had was a bedpan. They couldn't find a gas can. So they filled the bedpan up with petrol, and they're struggling back to the car. They get to the car, and one of the nuns is unscrewing the gas can. The other, these bedpans are very, very wieldy when they're full, perhaps some of you know that. She's balancing like this. All of a sudden, a big limousine screeches to a halt. The window rolls down. Fancy all by itself. You push a button and it goes out down. Who's there but the Reverend Ian Paisley?
Oh my God.
And he sizes up the situation, looks at the two nuns, one struggling with the bedpan, the other with the gas cap, and he says, "Sisters, I don't agree with your religion, but I do admire your faith." Now, the 9/11 Commission report is worth just what Ian Paisley thought was in that bedpan. Folks sometimes forget that Dick Cheney and George Bush were dragged kicking and screaming by some friends here into a real, or what purported to be a real investigation. Cheney, in the beginning, right after 9/11, said there will be no investigation because we're busy with wars, and if you call investigations, we might not let White House witnesses appear. It was that blatant. And then, of course, that first one was delayed unconscionably. So when they finally get around to it, what do they have? Well, the composition of this delegation were all either lawyers or politicians, and some of them were both. Now, my grandmother would say, if that's society, excuse me. Okay?
Right.
Now, I have nothing against, well, I guess I do have something against lawyers and politics. Well, anyhow, you call that representative of the American people? And you know what, folks? I'm glad to see this is not the case here tonight, but all of them look exactly like me. Isn't that nice, huh? All of them but one token woman who looked pretty much like me anyway. That's representative of the American people? I don't think so. How about well, let me just mention one other thing that my grandmother told me very early on when I had my first summer job when I was 14, and all you needed was a social security number to work on the golf course. And it was in eastern Long Island. Some of you may know it, the Maidstone Club. Very, very tony on the dunes of the ocean there. And before I went out on my first day, it was my birthday, she said, "Now Raymond, you're going to be working with the upper crust. So you need to know what the upper crust is." I said, "Grandma, I think I know." And she says, "No, you don't know it. I'll give you the definition." She said, "The upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by a lot of dough." That sort of epitomizes the 9/11 Commission, led by the patrician Thomas Keane. Now, how about this business about subpoenas? Well, they constructed it in such a way, Dick Cheney picked most of the members, at least 4 of them for sure, he approved the other ones, that you could have a subpoena, but you needed a majority vote. And there were 5 Republicans, and there were 5 Democrats. Guess how much chance there would be of getting a majority vote? Okay. Max Cleland, whom you saw in that movie, he was eased off the commission. I wonder why, you know, I wonder why. He was the only one insisting on doing it right. None of them had any intelligence in investigations or intelligence. The chair, Kane, he made a virtue out of having no prior Washington experience. You know? He said, well, you know, this could be an advantage because I come in, you know. And they said, well, are you going to get up to speed pretty quickly? He said, well, I think I'll come down once a week from Drew, and oh yeah, I'm a fast learner. I'll learn real fast. But then when he got down there, he complained, you know, it takes me half the day to get in the White House and get a badge and get access to the sensitive information, and then I have to take my own notes, and then I have to leave them there after 2 hours because I have to get the train back to Drew University. Give me one break. Give me a break. All he had to do was say, look, I want a secure facility set up in my office at Drew University. I want 2 guards there through the night, and I want the information available to me anytime I want to go look at it. I mean, it just was, you know, if anybody who knows Washington, you know, this guy was being led around by his nose. You know, when Bush and Cheney decided they couldn't possibly see the investigators alone, and they had to hold hands while they were talking to the commission. And when, you know, when they forbade, they said, you can't take any notes of this, much less a tape recording. I mean, you know, does that make you suspicious, folks? Does that you know?
Not at all.
Surprise, surprise. They came up with the school solution. That's what we called it in the Army, the school solution. Full of omissions and distortions, of which most of you know, because you've read David Ray Griffin's books on this and so forth. I asked my brother Joe, what would Grandma say about these conclusions? You know what he said, I should say, they ought to be tied to a cow's tail.
Right.
Think of that image.
Grandma is right here in this chair.
The results were fixed, folks, fixed, okay? Just like the Downing Street memoranda, the British were told that the intelligence be fixed around the policy. Now, you'll recall that Fox News said, now please don't jump to any conclusions, folks. Fixed has an entirely different connotation in British usage.
It does not.
I said to myself, wow, you know, so I called my friend Harry in London. Harry, what does fixed mean? What does fixed mean? He said, Ray, have you lost it? I said, no, just tell me what fixed means. He says, well, you fix a horse race, you fix an election. What's the matter with you, Ray? Fixed is fixed, folks. And that's what they did with the intelligence. That's what they did with the conclusions of the 9/11 Commission. I have sort of a neuralgic reaction to this because some of you are old enough to remember the old fixing of basketball games here in New York. And I happened to play for Fordham, and I was the smallest fellow on the team, so I wasn't much of a threat on offense except, you know, from the outside. And they only gave you 2 points in those days. Otherwise, I could have been a contender, right? But I was pretty good on defense, and they put me on NYU's high scorer, averaging 28 points a game. I held them to 12. Big accolade. Big accolade. Oh, right there. 3 years later, I'm reading the New York Times sports section. Big scandal. NYU involved in fixing games, shaving points, and the fellow that I guarded so successfully was shaving points. So I have a sort of neuralgic reaction to that, and I hope you don't go tell any of my Fordham colleagues what really happened, because they may not have seen it that day. Well, it fixed it was. Now, my session with Rumsfeld was mentioned before, and I had a session with Mineta as well. That's more relevant to these proceedings. And when people say, you know, well, how did you summon the courage to confront Rumsfeld that way? Well, I'll tell you how. I'm sitting there, and I'm preparing my own speech for that evening. That's why I was at Atlanta. And I got the goods on this guy, but I'm still thinking, oh, should I? Oh, yeah, he sort of looks like a hostile audience. Should I? And then I thought, you know, what would Cindy Sheehan do? You know, what would Ann Wright do? You know? What would Sibel Edmonds do? Or the Raging Grannies, what would they do? Or what would Rachel Corrie do? Rachel Corey's parents gave me this bracelet. Actually, her father did. All it says is Rachel Corey, April 10, 1979, March 16, 2003. It's the women that have given me the guts, let me tell you. And it was the women that got me up there talking to Rumsfeld. It was the women that persuaded me as I had this debate with myself as to whether I should do this. It was Constitution Day, September of last year. We were at Georgetown University, a very fancy theater. I was reading Amendment number 9 for the Constitution, and Mineta was reading Amendment 13. So I'm saying, you know, should I find out where he comes out? And maybe, nah, I should. And then I had the same thought process. So I went down, I found him, and there he is, big hall here. And he's accompanied only by a young woman, a student from Georgetown. And so, I don't know if you know how things work in Washington, but I went up and said, Secretary Mineta, how good to see you again.
Oh, good for you.
And he looked and said, Ray McGovern. He said, oh, Ray, of course, yeah, how are you? I'd never seen him before in my whole life. You know? That's the way things go in Washington. So, do you have a minute? Yeah, well, sure. So I said, you know, a lot of people have these theories about what happened, and your session with Cheney in the bunker really is core. Now, you know, there was that man that kept coming in and said, you know, 50 miles out, 30 miles. Who was that young man? I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, did he have a uniform on? Oh, no, he didn't have a uniform on. Well, did you ever think to ask who he was? No, I never thought to ask him. I said, well, it's just, you know, he's 10 miles out, and then 10 minutes later, something plows into the Pentagon. He says, yeah. He says, you know, we were worried about that plane in Pennsylvania, and it was those folks that inside his eyelids there was a little sign, and it said, "Speak only about Pennsylvania." And they came down, and for the next 8 minutes of that 10 minutes, all he could talk about was whether there was a shootout order for Pennsylvania. I said, no, we're talking about when you said, and the man came in, young man, and he said, oh, and it was about the Pentagon. Remember Lee Hamilton asked you mean the Pentagon? And he said, yeah, that's what I'm asking about. Yeah, but that plane in Pennsylvania. And so I've got my immediate experience of the disingenuousness, if not the deceit, or, you know, the incredible hypocrisy that accompanies this kind of thing. It makes me very angry indeed. I think Father Frank is right. There are more of us than there are of them. You know, it's very biblical, but it's true. There are more of us than there are of them. And I think you're the best example. You know, if you could be up here looking out at you, there would be no chance that you would be discouraged. You would be equally disgusted at what's going on, but you would be encouraged by what I see out there. What I see is a typical New York crowd of committed people who are going to make a difference. And this initiative is very, very exciting to me. I would cite you as the best example of what we need, and I would say that honor is shared with Cindy Sheehan, for whom I have the highest respect. You know, it's worth thinking back on what Cindy did when she got that inspiration speaking in Dallas of going over to Crawford. The president had just said her son's death was worth it, that it was in a noble cause. And she said to herself, that's it. I'm going over to Crawford to find out what this noble cause was. And to her credit, she got up and said, I'm going to Crawford. Anybody come with me? And to their credit, courageous women of Code Pink says, count us in. As did the Veterans for Peace. Most of them men, I'm happy to say. Some of the men get into the act early on. Now, why is that possible? Because, you know, as my granddaughter Claire says, all of you, as well as Cindy, have someone in the picture. Otherwise, you wouldn't be true New Yorkers. These people are real to you. And we mourn not only the 3,000, but as has already been said, the 3,800 U.S. service people who have been killed in an unnecessary war, not to mention the Iraqis who have died, numbering up around 1 million who would be alive today had it not been for this terrible thing. Now, how do we handle, I think the main challenge is this, how do we handle the pimps and the madams of our hydra-headed corporate media? I say hydra-headed because for every Judy Miller, there are 3 that spring up in her place. Cy Hirsch, who used to work for the New York Times, said it in typically New Yorkese. Somebody said, "What do you think of the Times now?" The place where I used to work. And he said, "I think they stink." Yeah? That's what we used to say about the Yankees or the Dodgers, you know, they stink. You know, well, the New York Times stinks. And the last proof of it, the most recent proof of it, is the fact that they haven't even mentioned what Scott McClellan put in his book, that the president knew about the deception of Hillary Clinton. Now, why aren't we all swarming over the offices of the New York Times on Monday morning to make sure that somebody takes note that they're derelict in their duty once again?
That's right.
Not to mention Sibel Edmonds, who was referred to earlier. Some of you know that Sibel has said, "I'm going to risk arrest and prison. I'm going to tell all that I know, despite the gag order that has been on me for 5 years. Only requirement that I make is for a major media company to agree to film it, verbatim, not cut it, and run it." Guess how many media have come forward with interest? Well, 0 for the United States, like 150 from Europe and Asia, you know, and she's holding out for somebody from the United States. Now, people talk about conspiracy theories. People are allergic to 9/11. How do you deal with this neuralgic issue? My suggestion is that we hit them straight on with it. We break it down into digestible, chewable segments, okay? There's so much out there, all you need to do is read just one of David Ray Griffin's books. It's almost too much. So what I think we need to do is just separate them out, hit them right between the nose, make sure that they know that we have the kind of evidence that can't be just dismissed, okay? Now, I had some recent experience with that, and I find it a learning experience and just pass along to you. When I mention the state of Israel, not the Israeli people, but the state of Israel, and the role that it plays in our Middle East policy, I get accused of, I get called all kinds of names, okay? But, you know, I'm not running for office, and I don't need any money, and, you know, my tradition is to tell it like it is. So I wrote 2 articles recently, some of you may know this. One on the USS Liberty. If you don't know about the USS Liberty, you're really going to look it up. USSLiberty.org or something like that. And another on, I guess the title was Attacking Iran for Israel. Because I think any objective observer in search for the answer to the question of why the hell will we ever attack Iran? That's the answer. Now, I batten down the hatches and said, oh, here it comes. And guess what, guys? Nothing. And I'm forced to conclude that they just don't want to draw any attention to these things. And I suggest that when we get 9/11 down to real factual things, which many of you have already done, discrete little chewable portions, that the mass media or the corporate-owned media will have real problems dealing with you all. And if we make imaginative use of the internet, I think we'll be way ahead of the game. Because the truth will out. There's no doubt about that. I just say that besides more imaginative ways to use the internet, that suggests there are also other steps that we need to imagine. Make sure that in your small circle of imagining, you have a courageous woman, at least one, okay? Because these women have insight and intuition and all kinds of good ideas as to how to do, for example, nonviolent civil disobedience, okay? It's come to that, folks. Martin Luther King said, there comes a time when you have to put your body into it. And when I sat there in John Conyers' office, after 20 minutes of trying to persuade him, you know, that there were high crimes and misdemeanors, which he acknowledged, but that he needed to pursue that, which he said, no, nothing in the Constitution says John Conyers has to proceed on this. I decided I just couldn't leave. Why? Because as an Army officer, I took a solemn pledge, an oath, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, okay? And so did he, and so did he. So I was wrapped up, and actually I was convicted of unlawful assembly, despite what the First Amendment says, and now I guess I can't get into Canada. It doesn't really matter, folks. We're at the point where we have to stick our necks out, you know? Now, I've been accused of having something against necks, okay? I mean, they are convenient connections between head and torso.
Connected to the
You know, but if there's nothing for which you will risk that neck, then it has become your idol, and necks are not worth idol worship. You all know that. You have to tell your friends as well. You have to use your imagination to find more inventive, more imaginative ways to do that. So let me just close here by saluting the notion of putting this ballot initiative forward, and closing with what my good friend Reverend Yearwood down in Washington always says, power to the people. That's us. Thank you.